everyone, and welcome to China EVs and More, where my co-host Lei Sheng and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the China EV, AV, and mobility sectors. What Lei and I discussed today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. For those that are new to the show, welcome. And to our loyal listeners, welcome back. We ask that you please help us get the word out about this podcast to other enthusiasts. And of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Li. I am the managing director at Sino Auto Insights, a global management consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.com, which of course, I encourage you all to do. Lei, as you had mentioned right before we started recording, we are heading towards the home stretch of 2023. There's been a lot that's been happening. There are a lot of those newsletters that'll talk about what's happened. We will also be doing that, and we will look forward to 2024. You and I are going to have some predictions. Maybe we can look at what we said last year and see how close we were. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, sir. Good morning. This is Lei Sheng, former chief editor of China Auto Review, and this is episode number 143. We are at the top of the month, of the final month of 2023. And I think, yes, home stretch and this China EVs movie that we're seeing playing out just got a lot more spicy, I think, over the last few days.
It's already Henla, right? So
yeah, and I tweeted that, the year is ending on a bang, but we still have a month to go. That's how it feels like, right? And too many headlines.
I just saw that BYD crushed it again in November.
Yeah, let's quickly just get over the sales for November, right? The first of every month is a mad scramble for people putting all those bar charts.
Whoever, at least at the brand level, those that want to show off the numbers and some that don't. So
I think I had a quick glance this morning, and it's for quite a few of these, it's pretty flat if we do a month-on-month comparison. Everybody's right where they are. I think the three brands that stood out for me were definitely Ito because of the M7, right? So they had a huge jump. I think Voya had a huge jump. IM had a huge jump with the LS6, which I think was part of the reason why Jiyue announced that price cut.
Yes.
And Wuling because the new Bingo and all of these ones that grew, the common thread is new models. But
let's call this the new model bump.
Yeah, but let's talk about Jiyue 01 for a minute. I'm a little bit concerned, to be honest. I don't know if you feel the same way for a brand that launches in the first month and then did a price cut. I think somewhere it went wrong. I hate to say it, but this is not what we expected, what I expected.
This is a pretty significant price cut too. So it wasn't, a couple $100.
I don't know. I mean, I think, are we seeing perhaps a repeat of the Xpeng G9 mistake? I'm thinking along those lines because you had to pay, I think, for the ADAS, right?
Right.
High levels of ADAS features. And I think that might be one of the tactics that could have gone wrong.
And I remember last month, Lei, you and I talked about, that's a fairly reasonably aggressive initial price. So I didn't think it was overpriced at all. So a month in to be cutting the price, I echo your concerns.
Yeah, but at the same time, this reflects how fast decisions are made, right? I mean, whether it's for good or for bad, but...
And we might be seeing the pendulum swinging a bit, Lei, where there might be too much technology now.
Yeah, I mean, but the expectations of what you're getting, bang for the buck is a lot lower. And that creates the expectations and pressure that if you don't get it right, then what ends up happening is what Jiyue did.
Yeah.
So that's how tough it is.
remember that Jiyue is the joint venture between Baidu and Geely. So Geely is the contract manufacturer. And if Jiyue is not filling that factory with orders, there's going to be increased pressure for Jiyue to increase sales in a short period of time, because we're talking about a major production line for Geely that's sitting idle effectively.
Yeah. And likewise, for BYD, they're not, I mean, they're the top, but they're under a lot of pressure as well. Right. So, I mean, the amount of promotional activities that had been launched, right? I mean, we've seen the posts, 8,000 off here, 10,000 off there.
And I want to make sure that we get back to your original point that sales seem to be flat, because it took a lot of effort to keep them flat from a price war standpoint, from a price reduction standpoint. So the companies, Jiyue is the prime example. They're still cutting price, and they're still creating incentives for the purchase of these vehicles. So it's taken a lot of effort to just keep sales flat.
Yeah, that sounds deflating.
It makes it concerning for at least Q1, Q2 of 2024, because there's probably a lot of sales that have been pulled into 2023. And this increases the pressure of the continuous price cuts into 2024. You and I had agreed that the price war is going to last at least through the summer of 2024. So,
well, back to your point about, our predictions, my prediction was, at the beginning of the year, it was over 9 million, and more or less it'll get there. But if we look at a huge part of that was export, right? So Shenlan just launched in Thailand. Neta, I think, launched in somewhere. So we're seeing these export numbers account for a big portion of the sales.
Yes. And that there's globally now a ton of scrutiny on that export number.
Yeah.
And so it's important to kind of keep an eye on it. And not only the big export number, but the mix between ICEs and EVs.
Yeah. And speaking of, so Li Auto just is planning to launch in Middle East.
Right.
And I think that's specifically to your point about this global scrutiny, that they want to launch in a region where there's no scrutiny. So not
friendly,
Europe, definitely not the US, right? So, and,
So this is the crazy thing, though. Let's point back to Stellantis investing in Leapmotor. Tavares was really one of the headline points that he made was, we're going to be shipping EREVs into Europe. And so Li Auto has to feel conflicted a little bit, because they're like, well, we're the king of EREVs. So, but I agree. And I can't help but to point back to some of the Faraday Future posts on Twitter about selling into the Middle East and having those big road shows. So another pseudo Chinese EV company that's high profile but struggling has looked to the Middle East to really try to shore up some of their sales for 2024.
And then, speaking of the foreign automakers, so a week ago, Volkswagen announced that China main platform based on the MEB exclusively for China. And they're saying it's going to take 36 months to develop 4 vehicles that'll be priced in the 18,000 to 22,000 euro range.
Those vehicles will not make money.
Well, not only will not make money, but will they be competitive in 3 years?
Yeah. Maybe that's a more appropriate question.
But to Volkswagen, 3 years is China speed.
Yeah, that's the irony of it, because that is probably them with their most optimistic speed to market forecast, 3 years.
But I'll say Volkswagen is the most aggressive in terms of localizing with respect to working with partners like Horizon, Thundersoft, Xiaopeng, right? But
I'll counterpoint to your point, Lei. They were also one of the last to the party.
So it's a mad dash for them. Basically.
Yes, I actually think that they looked and assessed that they're really behind, because I'll give you a high profile. GM went early and we're like, you know what, we're going to invest in Momenta. That's just a simple example,
Yeah.
but just a localizing example. Porsche, Tesla, they all announced R&D centers. And then it wasn't until, what's CEO's name? Volkswagen Group's CEO's name? Until he came on board. Until he came on board and was able to, because again, I don't necessarily believe that his strategy is so much different than Deese's, but he's just polishing it and the messaging a bit more so that it's palatable for the folks in Ingolstadt, in Stuttgart, in Wolfsburg.
Yeah.
And let's not forget that there was an announcement from Schaefer that Volkswagen brand is going to be losing a lot of employees, reducing 10 billion euros worth of expenses. That's the plan. And to your point about Volkswagen speed, they have, like the United States or the US 3, they have a strong union that they need to work with in order to transition roles. And in the announcement, it said that they won't be laying people off until 2029. What they're trying to do is get early buyouts and then reduce through attrition. So not hire people back for roles when people retire or take early buyouts. That's not going to work. We've seen that with the US 3, and it's nobody takes the buyouts, number one, and it's a slow process.
Let me ask you an interesting question. What Elon mentioned, that of the top 10 EV makers in the world, Tesla will be one of them, and the other 9 will be Chinese. What do you think about that?
At this point in time, I'm 100% in agreement with him.
Maybe it already is.
So I'm because this is the thing. The European market and the United States market is still waking up to the EV phenomenon. They're still in a little bit of denial.
It's going back to sleep.
Yeah, they're just in denial because, and it goes back to I'm just become much more sensitive to all the back and forth in the U.S. with regards to the dealers pushing back, to Mary and Jim saying, "Oh, the market is not moving away, but slowing down for EVs. There's inventory building up." And at a practical level, that's all true. But the EV market is not shrinking. We're going to go from around 800,000 units last year to 1.1 to 1.2. So that's a healthy growth rate. And that's despite a lack of products. Because outside of Tesla, which probably has 40 to 50% of the sales for the US market, there's Kia, Hyundai. I don't even count Hummer. I don't count Rivian. I don't count Lucid because they're $90,000 cars. And so until we see more Bolts, because Lei,
let's get a GUL over here. And I'll buy it, without hesitation.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like a $35,000 BYD or a GUL, because even the ID4s and they're even Americans don't like ID4s or ID series vehicles.
Yeah.
So that's a global issue for Volkswagen. It's not a China market thing anymore. It's a global issue.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, if you had tweeted, Tesla's the only company that would get this level of attention for a truck that they announced 4 years ago, and an unveil. It's a $61,000 starting price truck, and they'll probably sell as many as they can make, at least through the first 2 or 3 years, right?
Yeah.
So don't tell me that people don't want EVs. They just don't want your EV.
Yeah.
I think that's the important distinction, because at the end of the day, it's a 9,000-pound Hummer for $120,000. Are you serious? Now, charging infrastructure is a challenge. Cell manufacturing capacity is a challenge in the United States. But to say that there's no, it's a $61,000 truck and there's a million reservations.
The 61,000 won't even come until 2025. That's a real drive version, right? So
it's the $70,000.
79,000, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's just say 80,000. They'll get the
And I tweeted now for the utilitarian folks or the business folks that actually use trucks for work and for their livelihood, they're not going to buy the F-150 Lightning because the range when there's a huge payload or when it needs to tow something is so small. So for casual buyers, how many are going to pick an F-150 Lightning over a Tesla Cybertruck? I want to see what the statistics are after 6 months, after 12 months, because it's a casual buyer. Now maybe they just want a fun car or a car that kind of gets them a set of eyeballs. And Cybertruck obviously does that. So
yeah, I think Cybertruck will sell. I think that they'll, it's a polarizing product. It's it's got a lot of attention, but I'm not sure how many of those million orders.
Well, that's the thing, Lei, because it's a million orders. But if you were 900,000 in line, you're not going to get that for 3 years. He said.
Right.
So
yeah.
And it's a $250 deposit. So let's say the take rate is 20%. That's still pretty significant. So there's a lot of misinformation when it comes to EV stuff. And God forbid the CEOs were wrong, right? Because I don't see any of the CEOs really taking any blame for wrongly forecasting their EV goals. Okay. So anyways.
Well, let's go back to China a bit.
Yeah.
And I think one of the key words for the last week or so I can think of is frenemy, co-opetition. And I'm pointing to the case of Mercedes and BMW doing that JV for charging, as well as the battery swap. Let's say
they don't have a choice,
alliance, and the Huawei move, right, with the 60-40 entity that they're trying to set up.
Huawei is going gangster, because they are either in talks or already partnered with 6, 7, 8 brands.
So just this morning, which is the evening time in China, JAC put out a statement formally announcing their strategic partnership with Huawei, which will lead to the third brand under that HEMA.
Yep.
The Harmony Intelligent Mobility Alliance. So the Ito, 问界, the Luxeed, 智界, and the third 界 will come out. I don't know what it's going to be called, but from JAC. And the only one remaining is the one with BAIC.
In Lei, we have to point back to MIH.
Yeah.
And kind of Huawei's a hardware and a software. So they have a complete stack. But MIH from Foxconn, that's what Huawei is, what MIH wanted to be, in effect. So, but I also feel that Huawei is bullying some of these companies into using its technology. So
yeah, and it's interesting that they announced that new entity with Chang'an first, and Chang'an is not in the HEMA alliance. Chang'an is in the second business model, which is the high Huawei Inside model, and it looks like, and then JAC and Ceres put out statements saying that they're aware of this and they could become investors into this entity, as well as the BAIC and Chery, right?
For those that are wondering, Ceres is the joint venture partner with Huawei that is building the Ito vehicle.
Yes. And Chery is the partner for Luxeed.
And the critical thing is that I would argue the Huawei brand stands out more than the EV brand on a lot of these cooperations.
Yeah, because all of these events announcing these products, it's Richard Yi, front and center, right? And he's known for a big mouth, right? Talking BS and dunking on people. So,
but remember also, you and I have heard that he's under tremendous pressure to generate revenues for that division, right?
Yeah.
Tremendous.
Yeah. So basically, the spinning off of the vehicle business unit into that entity, which Huawei will still have 60%. At least that's what's put out by the statement. getting outside investors. I think it's also a way to, I guess, the sense is that Huawei doesn't want to, I don't know how to put this. Like the automotive side of it, they wanted to kind of not be involved with Huawei in some way, like,
Yeah.
but they still have, 60% ownership.
It's one of those things where do as I say, but not as I do, because they keep on saying that we're not building cars and we're not going to get into the business of building cars, but that's to make sure that their cooperation partners don't get upset, because effectively what Huawei's doing is the puppet master, because all of their joint venture partners, Lei, and correct me if I'm wrong, are very state owned. So there's going to be this set of state owned EV brands that most of them are going to use the HEMA or the High. And then there's these EV startups like a NIO, like a Li Auto that are in a GU that are building their own capabilities. And then you have that third, and I'm not saying it's direct competition or it's direct comparison, but Geely has eCarX,
which is, well, Meizu is about to make a car. Dream car MX.
So with the price war, with the number of brands, with the number of products, the reality for a lot of these new brands, even at the SOEs, the new brands within the SOEs, profitability is pushed out for years.
Yeah, it almost feels like so the four partners in the HEMA, Ceres, Chery, JAC, and BAIC, I think with the exception of Chery, the other three in terms of their own indigenous brands have been weak. So they're almost like trying to leverage Huawei in launching these high-end brands, right? Luxeed, Ito, the next one from JAC. So maybe that's the strategic thinking.
And I feel that number one, they're already SOEs, or so for those that are listening that don't know what an SOE is, a state-owned enterprise. And in China, provincial governments normally are very, very active in automotive manufacturing. So there are a number of brands that are state-owned. And because they're already state-owned enterprises and they're using Huawei, they've conceded the export market, because a lot of countries are going to be hesitant to use or allow vehicles to be imported that's using a Huawei hardware software stack, in my opinion. Do you agree?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, Chery, JAC, BAIC, they all export, but mostly I think ICEs for now,
right?
Which doesn't involve Huawei, and the volumes are pretty big. So it'll be interesting. I mean, for now we can't see Ito and the Luxeed being exported, at least not yet, or maybe never. I don't know.
But we could see Avatar.
Well, Avatar is launching was it Thailand too? Or,
yeah.
So regions, right? Regions where there's not these sensitivity or scrutiny, right?
Well, let me put it another way. Like regions where the trade deficit is important, where the smaller country needs Chinese imports.
Yeah.
So China has the Chinese brand might have a bit more leverage, but I guess I'm more referring to, and you know this, but I'll spell it out. I'm more referring to like Western Europe, obviously the United States, things like that.
Yeah.
Places like that.
All right. The Chang'an Geely NIO alliance. I think we
Have you heard anything? Your moles tell you anything?
Let's do this. Who do you think is going to be the next one? I have a couple that I'm thinking.
Well, they said JAC.
Well, I think GAC.
Oh, okay.
You know what? Because Geely, the second one, already operates the EE Power swap stations.
Right.
And quite significant at that, the network. GAC also has its own for the Hyper battery swap. So I'm thinking the potential, I think, even for CATL, even for Alton, if China is behind this, why not just, put it in an alliance and let's grow this together. So I agree also, JAC, I mean, it's a natural, right? JAC is the partner for NIO. GAC, rumored FAW. I think that anybody's, the state-owned companies, I think they're all in play.
And I think that it's important to note that this is wide ranging. It's not just passenger vehicles. It's going to be fleets.
Fleets, right.
A lot of taxis. So on the commercial side, as well as the passenger side. Okay.
And also going forward, instead of NIO, so let's say NIO sets up these separate partnerships, let's say with 10 companies, 10 OEMs. The possibility of a kind of the Huawei spinoff as to the NIO battery spinoff, swap spinoff. What do you think about that?
I think it lightens the load, and I think it's important to note because another thing, I said the same thing about 30 seconds ago, but Geely and Chang'an last year combined for almost 4 million vehicle sales, and so that's how significant these announcements are.
And the myriad of brands under those two groups.
Exactly. So it's instantly, if there was any doubt about swapping, at least in China, this should relieve all of that, because the potential for, and I'm not saying it's, 4 million units are going to be sold that can swap next year. It's going to take at least 2 years probably to figure out the standardization and then start manufacturing them. So it could be 5 years before we see, a couple million or 1.5 million of these cars across different brands that have the same capability. But we're talking the economics really, really ramps because Geely and Chang'an are such huge players in the China market.
And then what also complicates things is NIO has to expand its own network that'll have special exclusivity in terms of services for the NIO users.
It has to.
Yeah. And at the same time, build out these shared kind of the network. But luckily, they'll have help with the upfront investment.
I'm going to give you an example, Lei, because you're not in agreement, because I know you will. If I'm looking at some of the Geely brands like Geometry and some of these these lesser brands, could you imagine a Geometry? So for our foreign listeners who don't know what Geometry is, it's a mass market brand under the Geely umbrella of companies. And in tier 2, tier 3 cities, you see a lot of them, certain tier 2, tier 3 cities, and a lot of them are used for DD. So they're effectively a fleet vehicle. And so if I'm a Westerner, it's like a Chevrolet and a Cadillac. And so could you imagine a Geometry going into a NIO swap station and getting the same type of treatment? That's why it's important what you just said, that NIO needs to separate the NIO experience from these other companies.
And I think William stressed that himself.
How they do that is going to be really interesting.
Yeah. So these, that's why, I said it's all of these deals now are for show rather than dough. We're still waiting for that dough, right? The concrete, which model is going to get this will be battery swappable and things like that, right?
It opens these questions. Are there going to be two standards, a mass market standard and then a premium standard? Does that mean there are two sets of batteries? Does that mean that, so is the differentiation going to be a user experience thing? Because physically, if it's one standard, the bottom of a NIO and the bottom of a Geometry are effectively going to be the same.
Well, let's just say, Alton and what Geely has with e-Power is totally different than NIO. It's more mechanical, I think, rather than more, intelligent like NIO.
The one thing that we also have to note is that, Lei, if I draw you a box to play in, some of your creativity as a brand might be constrained because it needs to be X size, it needs to hold X weight, and it's this tall. So the floor of the vehicle might be constraining from a design standpoint. So That's also going to be very interesting to see, because what's to say that a swap station can get a bit more complicated and carry two sets of batteries. And the once you drive into one, it automatically knows that it's a NIO versus a mass market geometry, and it replaces the battery with the correct replacement battery. So, it is because I feel that having one standard, it's an oversimplification, because I don't think if you talk to Chang'an, if you talk to Geely, the Zeekr brand, the Avatar brand, the NIO brand, they're not the same as the mass market brands that they're all going to have. So they need to differentiate somehow, some way.
And my understanding is, let's say a future shared battery swapping station built by NIO and Geely. Now, that can perhaps accommodate, let's say, a geometry, a Levan, a Maple, a Zeekr. But can that accommodate a Deepal, an Avatar? Right? These we can imagine, right? Are they, specific to the specific partnership, or they across partnerships? So these are all possibilities that, how can we make it more accessible and flexible?
And I just gave you numbers, combined 4 million. So Chang'an was around 2.5 million, and Geely was about 1.5 million, a little bit less on both, but 差不多. Now, NIO is the standard, pushing a certain standard.
Yeah.
Lei, if you're the 2.4 million sales partner and I'm the 1.4 million sales partner, am I going to have my say? Of course I am. And you are. So that's why it's complicated. That's why it's not as straightforward. And that's why it's going to take time. And my guess is that the Chinese government is going to have to come in and really be referee, I believe.
Yeah. And then, excuse me, given the current market environment, NIO launching the Alps next year just became a lot more difficult. When you have Jive, right? They're launching a 200,000 to 300,000 RMB. I don't know. I mean,
profitability is going to be scarce on a lot of these companies. And I would say end of 2024, we'll probably see a number of them run out of capital, because as much as the state-owned enterprises can just pile money into losing businesses at a certain point in time, especially if the Chinese economy in 2024 is still struggling to get back into growth mode, the SOEs are going to cut off the funding for sure.
Yeah.
Because my assumption, Lei, is that all these Huawei partners, of all these Huawei partners, 2 or 3, 4, maybe, might survive through 2024.
Yeah, and then somebody like Jive, right? I mean, I hope they're okay, but they're not out of the woods.
Oh, no stretch of the imagination, because they're probably selling a couple thousand a month, maybe.
They didn't, well, we haven't heard. I mean, they launched at the end of October, so theoretically they should be announcing sales numbers.
Yeah, but at least 1 month. One full month.
Yeah.
And as we know from the Mach-E, from the G9, if you don't come roaring out of the gates when you launch, it is extremely hard to build momentum, sales momentum. Extremely hard to build sales momentum.
Yeah.
So anything else?
I think we covered pretty much all the big headlines.
I like how we talked. I think it was important to kind of really talk in detail or discuss in detail this whole swapping thing, and how it helps, but it doesn't. Because for at least NIO, it doesn't really move the needle on sales strategy. Yeah. So do you agree with that?
And they don't have a new model, at least not an all-new model, unless there's been some rumors of some kind of a 9 Halo model coming, or announcing the Alps, right? Their NIO days coming up.
Yes.
But, right, 2024, they will, work will be cut out for them still.
And maybe we should save this for our look ahead episode, but I just don't believe the China market is going to be able to grow like it has been. Even this year, I think 2024 might be difficult. to achieve the same amount of growth.
Well, once you get to 10 million, you can't expect, right?
Yeah.
And that's already a huge number.
Yeah.
It'll probably stay there. Let's say 10 million every year, as nobody's going to catch up anytime soon. Any market.
But you and I know also that the pressure in 2024 to export, specifically with the struggling EV makers, is going to be tremendous.
So we're supposed to be hearing some updates on the IRA rules today, I believe.
Yeah.
Have you heard anything new yet, or maybe it's being announced?
Well, I do know that Our Next Energy is reducing staff by 25%. So I had alluded to, we know that they have a lot of ex-US government folks on their team. So maybe they heard something that isn't as favorable to them.
Yeah, depending on what happens there. So one thing we can look forward to is possibly indeed some announcement by some Chinese brand via some path of entering the North American market in 2024. Not in 2024, but announcement in 2024. You think that's fair?
Yeah, it is. And I don't envy some of these people because, it's just going to be really tough.
Yeah, despite all the headwinds, right?
Yeah. So, Lei, I'm kind of done with we talked a lot about swapping, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Next week we'll probably have a more complete discussion on sales.
Yeah, I mean a million unit month, either November or December. I think it has to be that way. It always is. I mean, when the December numbers are the high for the year.
Oh, the one thing I did also want to mention, Lei, is that with this reconciliation by at least Ford and GM, and with GM now open to hybrid vehicles and the lithium and nickel pricing at lows, 2 year long lows, there's a lot of pressure on CATL, BYD battery side to get that capacity, because there's so much capacity built up on not only the battery cell manufacturing, but on the mining and refining, that there's probably going to be downward pricing pressure on battery cells for 2024 too. And so it's not only the Chinese EV makers, but it's going to be the battery makers. The CATLs are probably going to be a lot of pressure. Margins are going to get squeezed because the hybrid thing is the in the United States market, and specifically, the hybrid thing is kind of the wild card right now, because what if GM says we're going to mimic BYD, and for every EV we offer, we're going to offer a PHEV? So we knew that their original forecast, Mary Barra's 2024, we're going to have 400,000 units of sales for EVs. We knew that was never going to happen. But what if there were 400,000 BEVs and PHEVs combined? That effectively reduces the demand almost by half of GM, right? And I'm kind of just estimating, right? That's a significant reduction in demand. So keep an eye out on the export pressure, not only for Chinese EVs into Europe, Latin America, Southeast Asia, but battery cells as well, because there's been so much more capacity built, specifically in China. And so that's going to be the big concern from the governments, the foreign governments. But we have a comment from NIO Chicago. What do you guys think about Li Bin's comment saying power exchange network is equivalent to the cloud service infrastructure of the energy internet?
Well, yeah, I mean,
I'm just reading this, so I'm just processing while I'm reading it.
I think the physical, if you been hearing what Shenfei, the guy in charge of the NIO Power, has been saying, right? It's not only the physical stations themselves, but the cloud infrastructure that's making this work. Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on the technical details, but it's that whole experience of not only the battery swapping itself, whatever, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, but before and after, right? Of in that Mercedes and BMW presser, they were saying that you could do plug and charge, you could do reservation for a charging spot, things like that. I mean, those are all right cloud infrastructure.
I look at it this way. I look at it like they went from single brand, small market to multi-brand, large market. And I think that's what he's referring to. He went from, he wants to sell the picks and the shovels to everybody. And that's what opening the swapping will do for NIO. Now, again, it's going to be a separate business and it doesn't really help them on the vehicle sales side. So they still have challenges in front of them. That's all I had, man. Unless anyone has any other questions.
I'm good.
Yeah. Hey, happy December, everyone. I think it's December 1st today. And Lei and I will be in probably 2 or 3 weeks having our year-end episode. And then the following, maybe in week 1 or week 2 of January 2024, we'll have our look ahead episode. So thanks for listening, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening.
All righty. We'll talk to you guys next week. Bye-bye.
That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Lee, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.